Welcome to UpYourStack Podcast. I'm your host, Noah Burke. Every week, we feature conversations and interviews with some of our favorite HubSpot app developers who've either built their apps on HubSpot or who have integrated their apps with HubSpot, help you get the most out of your HubSpot tech stack. And today is a very unique day for me because I not only have one guest, I have two guests from an awesome company called Galileo. I have both Mike and Chris with me here. Mike, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Maybe Mike, share a little bit about yourself. And then Chris, how about you do the same? And then Mike, I'll throw it back to you to tell me, what does Galileo do?
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO, and I'll just bridge Chris into this pretty early. When Chris and I met in my prior organization, which is a full service agency about 15 years ago now. And we began working together on a number of different projects. One of them would eventually become Galileo.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm Chris Larkin. I'm the Chief Technology Officer. And again, to talk about what Mike was saying, we've been working together on various things in this space now for 15 years. And the Galileo product is the culmination of all of our learnings and all the challenges we faced in the digital marketing space we wanted to help people get past. And HubSpot's been a key to that with Galileo.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive right into it. So, Mike, how about I start with you? What is Galileo?
Sure. So Galileo is a comprehensive marketing intelligence platform. And it was kind of born of us being in the trenches week after week. And the story I go to is I'm sitting with the C-suite. It's a Fortune 100 financial services brand everybody knows. And after 6 months of work, we'd position this creative work and we'd run it and market. And the CEO looks over at us and says, great, what was the impact to the bottom line? And the entire marketing team kind of froze like deer in the headlights, as so many do so often when we're asked the ultimate question, which is where did each dollar I spent end up at the bottom line? And we couldn't answer the question. As much as we'd like to, we do this little like, oh, well, what happened was this, and there was engagement and visits, and we never could. And it was one of those moments where I looked around the room and I said, I'm going to exit this company. And we're going to solve this problem. And so that's when Galileo was born. And I had been working with Chris for a number of years and said, hey, you know what? I think we can do this. It's going to take some time. And we may have to do it in a slightly different way. And that's partly what we're so excited about is the mechanism of action for Galileo is different than it has been in any multi-touch attribution so far. But it's just one of those moments where you realize like, this can be solved. Yeah. And we can start answering the questions that have been kind of hanging out there by C-suites everywhere.
I think that the story of what's in it for me? What have you done for me? Where's the money actually going? Right. I mean, attribution is where it's all about to be able to understand it. So I guess there's a question for you, Chris. When you see the problem you're solving, ultimately in the end, what is that for a client?
It's a great question. So what we run into, and unfortunately, I think a lot of us fit into this category. It's companies that are successful in spite of themselves. In other words, they've got leads coming in. They've got profit. What's happening in the middle, they don't understand. What nurturing is working? What messages worked? What actual content are people consuming from your website? Hey, at the end of the day, we're making money, right? So it's not a problem. But the question is, what are the lost efficiencies? And that's what we're trying to find, or what are those lost efficiencies? Where can we turn down effort? And where are we not putting enough effort in? There's something we can exploit that we just couldn't see because there was so much noise. And Galileo is designed to help you cut through that noise, to have an infinite look back window to see all of the traffic metadata and actions and make a holistic decision about what needs to be happening next for most effective results.
And in your guys' opinion, are you selling to the marketers? Are you selling to the C-suite? Who are the individuals who are most interested to have a product like Galileo?
No, first of all, thank you for the question. It's one that we have been asking ourselves for years because as we developed it as an agency, and we developed it as an agency because we had these were our problems, and so we set out to uniquely solve our problems, and then we thought, well, we'll go ahead and sell directly to brands. The challenge is that brands still have an issue in that they need to hire agencies, right? It's complex enough. The space is changing. It's very dynamic, et cetera. So they needed agencies. And so after some time, we turned our attention back to the agency and said, we built this for you. And so our growth model, our whole model is built on supporting the agencies of the world, some of which are CRM integrators, right?
Mhm.
Some are hybrids, and then some are your pure play agencies, which to the world would never admit that they're not exactly sure what the result is to the bottom line. But when you get into the operations and the C-suite, they say, yeah, we're not really sure, and we really do need tools like this. And as soon as we walk through that door and have a conversation, it becomes evident that this is a clear differentiator for agencies as well. And for us, it's a win-win because we provide it at a better price point. They get a revenue share out of it, and they get the upside potential of increasing top-line revenue spend in the space because there's greater transparency, and it generates new lines of revenue because once you know what works, that if you go from this happened last week, went from a 1.7 ROAS to a 3.6 on no additional spend, all of a sudden trust goes up. The brand says yes to many more new initiatives because they know exactly what the return is going to be.
So why has this been such a tough problem to solve? And why a product out there to solve? Like, why hasn't it been solved today? Like, shouldn't this be commonplace to do attribution in the digital age?
Yeah, it's just so I'm chomping at the bit, but I'm actually going to pass this one to Chris because I think this is one that he would also love to answer. So I'm gonna let Chris answer.
I really
You want to take
appreciate
it, Chris?
this is one of my favorite ones to answer because the reality is that there is an incentive to not know the detail. Again, an example I just gave: leads are coming in. At the end, profit is there. All that detail to actually cut away the unnecessary spend is not advantageous to the providers, the ad platforms, right? And the agencies are also looking at that kind of element. So part of it is that if it's working, they don't really want to know all the detail. It is quite a bit of effort to undertake to figure this out, and especially to figure out in a way that's not just bespoke to your own individual needs, right? To create a platform like Galileo that each one can use. So there's a little bit of the level of effort to get in to do this is big, but there's also that what are the secondary things we want to avoid? What do we not want to know? And because there are many different players and they can be finger pointing, what we found is giving people the most information is better for everyone because the person with the most information usually wins.
Well, it's really interesting because I remember back in the day, maybe I'm dating myself now, there is a company out there called Reach Local, and I was back in the 2008, 2009 period. And at the time, the company, still to this day, I believe they're around, they would sell advertisements and drive people to a website. And no one paid attention to their website from a conversion rate optimization standpoint. They always want to put money towards ads. Well, you just need to get them there. Well, you need to get them there, but you also need to have them convert. And so I always considered marketing as two components, one, getting them there, two, converting. Is attribution really the third component? If you're going to spend money on ads and you're going to spend money in improving the conversions to your website, if you're not doing attribution, does that mean you're really not doing marketing effectively at this point? Is that kind of the future?
I think that's a good point. I love Mike's thoughts on this too. I was just going to say though that attribution is what allows you to do those other things. It allows you to measure what's coming in and allows you to measure the effect of that messaging. So without attribution, there's a lot of guesswork. Mike, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, just going back a half step to the prior question, why hasn't it been around? If you look at, I'll just take Google Analytics. It's a free tool. Does anybody stop and wonder why it's a free tool, right? And I just wrote a lengthy post on this on one of my newsletters, which is, if you're being offered a free tool, the chances are your data is the product, right? And so what happens is you plug in, you give Google Analytics or you give Google access to all of your data, and they see everything that happens. They know everything that goes on, and yet we're given, as part of Google Analytics, just a really small sliver of some of the analytics that are possible to be shown to us. Now, if you take that out to nth degree, for instance, the attribution window in Google Analytics is 90 days, right? Does anybody know this off the top of their head? Most people don't recognize the fact that it's incomplete. It's the data is skewed, right? And you're decisioning based off of poor data quality, effectively. Now, if you blow that up and you recognize that you're doing this year over year, it creates a substantial problem for you as a business to actually see what's happening all the way through. And so Google actually makes a ton of money off of your waste, right? Off of the things that you're saying, well, there's more traffic that comes in, so I'm going to amp that up. And what we find more often than not in the first 90 days is the thing that you thought was the most contributive to revenue is not. And oftentimes is 2 or 3 or a distant fourth. And only when you see leads added on and then finally revenue added on and then the value of the multi-touch conversions along the way, do you now have a sense of what's happening throughout the entire ecosystem. This is something that Google could have given us day one, and they still don't. Now, Chris, did you have something you want to add to that?
I was just thinking about along those same lines. I think that the lack of what we're getting, basically, we think a lot about privacy, but the privacy is really just about your client's
Sure.
data to you, because Google has all of your data, and they will use all that data to modify the way the algorithms work for all their advertisers. So what you're really doing is giving all your data to a third party, and what Galileo is about is bringing that back to where you own your client data, and you can make decisions about the client data you own fully interpreted.
So I think you guys gave an example earlier that there was a big increase in ROAS. And talk to me more about that. Like, when would a client expect to see that type of increase in return? And what are they doing? What type of client is this in general? Are they in the B2C market, the B2B market? Does it even matter for that point? So maybe this is kind of a two-part question here.
So first thing I want to call out is that the definition of return on ad spend, or ROAS, as you said it, is there's no standard definition, right? Google will use it one way, HubSpot will use it another way. And so it's highly problematic in that we commonly use this in conversations between marketers, between sales and marketing.
Sure.
Say, well, what was the return on that ad spend? And depending on the contextual framing, you're going to be talking about a return as being a visit or an event on page, right? It could be a form filled out or a download, and not all the way to what we definitionally think of it as being a function of economic return. And so that's the first problem in that. To answer your question, so our first challenge is to standardize what that means and to say it's an economic return and it's dollars in versus dollars out from a top line perspective. Then the answer to your question of when you could expect to see something is absolutely idiosyncratic to the business and the context. So in certain industries, you'll see those industries following a certain pattern. It depends on your mean time to lead and your mean time to revenue. And once you understand what those are truly calculated, not just I think our average is this, then you see a curve of distribution of effect along that line. Let's say it's 6 months in B2B, or your B2C is a consulting gig and it takes 6 months to a year to close. You're going to start to see the effects somewhere in the first third of that timeline, where you're starting to see patterns that you probably didn't expect. And it's really when you get into the heart of that mean, right, the average time to X, that you'll start to say, wait a second, there's some really interesting, even novel observations here and insights that we could take advantage of. Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you were asking about what space this would be, how it would work.
Correct.
We find it good for B2B or B2C. It's most optimal as we use it today for the lead journey, where you've got something that has a longer consideration period than that 90-day window. In higher education, for example, very high dollar cost for the degree program. You have to be very selective what you're picking. So people might be looking for months or years. Thinking about that 90-day attribution window that Google provides, this is where Galileo really shines best. But in any place where there's a longer period of consideration or evaluation for a prospect in 90 days, that's going to be the sweet spot, especially where that cost is higher too. So big ticket items, big decisions, those are all areas. Depending B2B, B2C doesn't really matter so much as that it's a big ticket with a lot of consideration and thought involved in the process.
And when people are spending this money, is it just Google Ads? Is it display? Is it across the board? Where are they spending their money? And then I'm going to follow with, generally, how much money should they be spending a month to say, I should use a product like Galileo?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So where they're spending money is, there's two halves to that equation, right? One is the hard cost of your actual media spend. Then your non-working dollar, which is how many people hours are you attributing to certain things like organic, right? Oftentimes organic is the dark horse there. We're not sure what we spend, but we have a lot of people doing a lot of things internally to do, right? And you're smiling because exactly right. On the inbound side, there's all kinds of costs that you could attribute to this. And that's where we get into more of a ROMI versus a ROAS equation. And if you want to use a ROMI, you can absolutely do that as well. We encourage it anytime it's possible. But I think this goes for any channel. And you can apply, in our platform at least, you can apply any amount to those channels that you could say, well, we spend about $10,000 a month in organic based on everything that we write and everything we publish and all the people hours associated. Or you can use your hard costs only and say, well, let's just restrict this to working dollars. So I think that's a big part of the equation, is just standardizing it for yourself. The first step is to say, here's how we're going to do it moving forward, and to try and stabilize that so that you can do competitive benchmarking over a time series. Was that both parts of your question?
That was good. And you did mention something called ROMI. Maybe for the audience, can you explain what that is?
Sure. It's the overarching umbrella over ROAS. So return on ad spend is typically just the working dollars associated with the ads. And so Google, your display or your paid search, et cetera. When we start talking about ROMI, which is return on marketing investment, that incorporates all of the costs. And so that's another level, right, of saying, what are all the people hours associated with it? Are there any other soft costs or hard costs for that matter we want to attribute to that bucket? And we're going to use those instead. In Galileo, you can use either. And so we can go in and we can attribute any amount to any of those channels, especially if you have a significant amount of work and you're trying to figure out, for instance, all the soft costs associated with people hours that might work on a team towards organic. That would be a good application of using ROMI. I hope I didn't over answer, but I think that.
No, you did a great job. And thank you for clarifying that for some people. And so I appreciate that. And so this software, Galileo, can obviously do a lot. It can help you determine what your return really is. It can help you do attribution. What is it like to get it set up? Is this like a time-intensive endeavor? Is this a one-time setup? It runs on its own? Like, just kind of walk me through, like, what is it actually like to put all this together? And what type of investment does a company need to make in their own time to make sure this is successful?
I'll take one half step back. And so there's multiple parts to Galileo. One of them is the multi-touch attribution, but we go steps beyond that into data-driven attribution. And that's a step beyond where your CRMs are today, using things like machine learning, unsupervised learning to see patterns in the data that otherwise are not evident in your old first touch, last click, W shape, U shape, J shape attribution that, for instance, HubSpot might provide. So what we try and do is capture all the data in a pristine way.
High-level perspective.
The great news is that when we started building this product, it took us many weeks, even a couple of months to implement. Every implementation was bespoke. We had native connectors to everything, hard coding, all kind of design. That's where we started out. Now we've gotten to a situation where we can implement very quickly. With a standard install, within a couple of weeks, we can have an organization fully operating. There is maintenance needed, but we guide them through this, or our partners guide them through this. And then we even have monthly meetings to talk about the data that we're collecting. We're going to find a lot of really big things in those first few days when we connect. We're going to discover things about their systems that the clients didn't know. But all told, it's a small investment of time to implement. The bigger investment for the client is going to be in taking the time to learn how to understand what the data means. We are building more advanced tools to actually give English prescriptive analyses. Right now, it's not. It's a lot of charts and some analyses, but it requires an analyst that understands it. So the biggest investment for users of Galileo is going to be understanding this more rich tapestry of data. It's quite a bit more than you would get from a Google Analytics or Google Ads. Imagining all your platforms woven together and even understanding the conversions across other platforms, so that when you get one conversion and someone clicked an ad on Facebook, Twitter, Google Ads, Google Display, and programmatic, that's not 5 conversions. That's one conversion, and it's weighted in our attribution based on the actual purpose and the value of each of those actions. So again, simple to install now. It's something that we can be done in less than 2 weeks for almost any organization, in days for a lot of organizations. The biggest issue is scheduling, getting our resources available to schedule for you. Otherwise,
it always is. It's always scheduling, ultimately, in the end. And so there are other companies who do attribution. Some of the software out there, like HubSpot, does attribution. So how does this differentiate, and how do you differentiate from these other applications in the market?
Right. Yeah, so the thing about Galileo is that we focused on what can we collect from the user experience first. Where a lot of the platforms, they're connected into the APIs of every ad platform, and they read all the data that the APIs provide. What we've found is that collecting the actual user actions as they're happening and stringing them straight to our back end and then processing it, stitching the data together later, gives us a much more comprehensive picture than a lot of the other tools. We rely on the actual user actions and not what an API might or might not provide. We can use the APIs to then enrich our data that's collected, but it's the first party data that we're collecting that distinguishes us from the competition. We also collect all data points. So where there might only be a couple of ads captured in HubSpot relative to specific events, we want to add more than just what HubSpot provides, and we'll show you every touch point. And we have there's a lot of things you can do to analyze it that weren't really possible when you're only looking at 90 days in a subset. When you're looking at 2 years of data, and you can measure specific events, like when someone submitted an application to get approval to become an MBA student. That's the information that we're really honing in. So it's really about being much more comprehensive. And also we have a data science team that is helping us find nuanced, new ways to analyze the data to give a picture that you can't really see from those traditional U-shape, first and last, even the data driven from Google.
So it almost to me sounds like I'm sure the iceberg analogy has been used a million times in all sorts of different industries. But I mean, it truly sounds like this is one of those scenarios that the iceberg analogy really makes sense as the existing tools in the marketplace is what you can see above the
Right.
water versus the entire picture of this massive opportunity is all sitting below the water in the case of an iceberg. And it sounds like in your particular case, you're, as you mentioned earlier, you're leveraging first party data, you're leveraging data that normally goes unseen to give yourself a more comprehensive picture of how the spend is really driving
That's
results. Is that a fair analogy to
that's exactly
use?
right. No, in fact,
100%.
one of the situations we've run into several times already is where a client has joined us using Galileo. Maybe they've got their budget split halfway, $1 million a year to Google Ads, $1 million to Facebook. And then they discover that even though half of their leads are coming from each, only 10% of their revenue actually comes from those Facebook leads. So they're spending all that fortune and money, and that's a low one. There's some that spend many millions. But even you asked a question earlier about what do you need to spend to have Galileo benefit you? Galileo is going to give the average company 20, 30, 40, 50% efficiency gains, reduce costs, more conversions that are good.
Wow.
And so you could be spending a very small amount, $10 or $20,000 a month. You can definitely exponentially increase your profitability, especially if you're in a situation where you can't see those details. If you really are in that spot where you're getting leads and you're making money, but you don't know how to optimize what's in the middle, how to make more of the leads turn into revenue, and how to isolate the leads that aren't going to be revenue earlier and save the hard cost of interactions and follow-up. That's the trick to it. And so we have something I think that will help anybody, even with a lower spend, to get value.
Wow. And what gaps do you suppose you're kind of filling in the HubSpot ecosystem now? And I know we've kind of alluded to and talked about it in general, but if you had to pinpoint it, someone has HubSpot, what gaps are you filling for them with Galileo?
Yeah, I'll take a couple of those because we get asked this First of all, we're huge fans of HubSpot. It's our CRM, so I'll start with that.
Yeah.
Right? I want that to be clear. However, there are between 7 and 10 dimensions of data quality, depending on who you ask. And about 5 of them, or half of them in any of those scenarios, fail immediately when you start getting into the walled gardens of any particular CRM. I mean, it can be
Sure.
Salesforce, it can be HubSpot, it can be Sugar. It doesn't matter. As soon as you get inside the walled gardens, you end up with inaccuracies. And I sometimes use the analogy of a treasure map, in that if you had a treasure map that was 75% accurate, would that be good enough? And the answer is absolutely not. Like, you'd be wrong, right? If you look at HubSpot's attribution page and you read the fine print, there are about 24 places where the word does not work if appear. And you can find them pretty easily in that there's a lot of instances where if you don't email the primary user on an ad account or an account, it doesn't record the record, et cetera. And all of a sudden, the integrity of the data fails immediately. So what you have is 99% to 98% to 90 to 76. And all of a sudden, the treasure map analogy kicks in, is that I can be shoveling and be off by 1% and probably still hit the edge of the trunk. I could be off by 15 or 20% and I'm nowhere near right where I need to be.
Yeah.
And the answer is that it will work to some degree. You maybe find some coins, we'll say, not to mix my metaphor, but you're not going to find the ultimate treasure. And that's what Chris described early in this conversation, which is there are a lot of companies out there that are successful in spite of themselves. We are doing something right. But what's dark, what's invisible to us is the counterfactual, is what would happen if we had all the right information. And I just challenge users of HubSpot to go to that page and see how many ways it can break for you to say, oh, wait a second. Not to mention the fact that if you use theirs, they'll strip your email marketing, put in of UTMs and put in their own. And so now if you ever try and switch, you're going out blind, right? They're turning you out to the world with nothing to show for it. So there are a lot of reasons why, and it's not just HubSpot, it's all the CRMs will do this. So if you're in and you're getting a moderate success, great. But if you want to really step it up and create clear differentiation between you and your competition in ways that they can't achieve, then it's time to look at an independent third-party platform like Galileo.
I appreciate you sharing that, because that's a question that most people always have, is like, what's the difference between X and Y? And as I do these podcast episodes, I mean, it's a common question that any customer is going to be asking. So kind of wrapping this up now, what's the future of Galileo? And I think you alluded to it a little bit earlier, Chris, where you were mentioning something to the effect of analyzing potentially with AI. But maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more about the future of Galileo and what people can expect.
I can share a little bit about that, and I'd love to have Mike's thoughts as well. But there are two big things that are coming forward. One is that this more interpretation and analyses that come straight to you already delivered, that it understands the particular clusters of KPIs and how they affect different operations, for that matter, different verticals. So it can understand for your use case with your data what the best answers are. But to give people prescriptive steps so they can take the information and know what actions to take immediately. And the second part is that we are releasing a self-serve version coming up. The next year will be a self-service version. We'll offer the platform to companies that don't have the ability or the resources internally to engage with consultants.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think just to cap that, Galileo was just recently, we wrote a case study for a business school, one of the top business schools in marketing, and it's now being syndicated worldwide and will be placed to the Harvard Business School system for cases. And so it's being used to teach marketing optimization globally today. I think that the next step for us is to continue to add in layers of machine learning, where not only, to Chris's point, are we going to serve up not just the platform, right? The platform is one thing, but you still need to glean the insights. The next step is to automate the insight delivery so that you don't have to be able to read it. You're just opening it up and saying, tell me, am I over or under? Like, what should I do? How do I reallocate? So what is available today is predictive revenue modeling, is where you can take your ROAS, historical ROAS, and in real time, you can say, I want to know what the future would look like if I reallocated my spend towards the highest ROAS based on the history. And so you can do that today in the platform, which is another advantage over some of the others. And then being able to automate using machine learning to an nth degree and having a conversation with the data and saying, great, over the last 30 days, what's the highest ROAS channel given it's a Tuesday, that kind of thing. So we're super excited about everything. And as you can tell already, it's coming at a breakneck pace. So we're just trying to keep up with capabilities.
Well, this is my last question for you. And Mike, Chris, I know, Mike, you've had one heck of an entrepreneurial career so far. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs?
So I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years, and I've exited a couple of the prior endeavors. And I think my answer is changing over time. As these get more light colored and I get the wings here, that changes over time. I think what I would say today is dig in. It's one of those things that you will always have good days and bad days, but you have to be an optimist. You have to say, like, tomorrow is a better day, and be prepared to get the door slammed in your face. People telling you can't do it. It'll never work, and be able to push a boulder uphill from a dead stop, because it's difficult, and yet I wouldn't trade any year of all the 25 years for anything, just because it's the most exciting, fun thing that you could do as a profession, I think. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Right. I think that the thing, you summed it up well, but I think the thing we all know is that if you do something you love to do, it does not feel like work. We have a blast. Yeah. We're helping companies achieve more, and we can pick and choose who we want to do business with. It's the great thing about it. There's a lot of opportunity out there in the world, and it's a great way to create something that you enjoy doing that makes you feel fulfilled. So entrepreneurship is the way to go.
100%. I love that advice. Guys, thank you so much for joining and coming on to the show today.
Thank you, Noah.
Mike, Chris, if they want to learn more about you guys, both how to get in touch with either of you, as well as find out more information about Galileo, how did they go about doing that?
100%. First of all, you can always email Chris or I, and it literally is mike@arcalea.com and chris@arcalea.com. You can also go to mygalileo.ai and find the website there. And we're always available for a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. That wraps it up. Again, Up Your Stack is a weekly podcast featuring HubSpot app partners who've either built their apps on HubSpot or have integrated with HubSpot to help you get the most out of your HubSpot tech stack. And if you're interested in leveling up your own HubSpot tech stack, feel free to reach out to me directly via on LinkedIn, Noah Burke. So again, thank you so much for joining us.